Death at the gates again. Howling my name. Can't greet you today. I have a war to win.
Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my Wolfenstein Uber difficulty video walkthrough. This is chapter 1, and it's called Deathshead Compound, or Deathhead's Compound, I should say. And it's the very beginning of the game, it's the tutorial of the game, and as you can tell by the aesthetic right now, we're aboard a plane in what looks like kind of like the stereotypical World War theme. But don't worry, if you're one of those type of people that really isn't interested in trenches and World War-y kind of shooters, this game doesn't really go down that path at all. It goes completely different, and it's better for it. Anyone who is familiar with the game, who's watching this right now, will notice that this is not exactly where you start, as this walkthrough is going to be pretty much as straight to business guide as I can make it. I'm cutting out all the fat. It's the same way I've always kind of done it, even more so now it's more streamlined, so any dead areas of the game, anything where you literally don't really need my help to guide you through, has been almost exclusively removed, along with cutscenes and other, great parts of the game, just not really necessary for this kind of walkthrough. And this is the first challenge of the game, which is a bit of an on-rail shooter moment where you get to shoot down these black-looking planes. This can be a little tricky, this, because it can be quite challenging to see who's friend and who's foe, and it can be difficult to spot them. Just because they're very fast, they're quite dark, and you'll notice at the bottom of the screen I have 179 cogs, which is your life. If that gets to 0, you will die and you will game over. It happened to me on my first playthrough because I didn't really know what I was doing. But as long as you shoot the guy flying towards you at the end, who the guy tells you to shoot, you should have no issue with this particular sequence. And luckily enough, there's not too many moments like this in the game. I think they're played out at this point. We've seen almost every single kind of rail shooter, and one of my pet peeves in a game is when the rail shooter sequences are more difficult than the game, because I think it's a little bit unfair. But here is another major transition just then. You'll notice I've skipped to the part where we have to jump across. You have to sprint and jump for this. If you don't, you'll not make it, you'll fall off, and you will die. And Wolfenstein, or Wolfenstein, depending on how you pronounce it, really does like to load. Even when it's installed on current gen hardware, this game loads pretty crazily. It takes quite a long time. And the elephant in the room to anybody watching this might be that this kind of looks a bit rough, which is incredibly unfair to the game, but unfortunately a reality on the current gen consoles. If you're going to play this game and you want it to look nice, you have to go PC, PS4 or Xbox One, because this is Xbox 360 and I'm in love with this game, but I have to admit it is goddamn ugly almost all of the time. It's pretty much the death of the Unreal Engine, even though this is an id engine. And what I mean by that is one of the easiest ways to spot, the Unreal tech is usually by texture popping, and how there sometimes can be a delay and everything looks like shit and then it all pops in and it looks nice. Well, the id tech on this is very similar, and on this hardware, you're gonna watch a very rough game. And it's a shame because the game itself is beautiful on the platforms that enable it to be exactly that. And on these older ones, they've sacrificed a lot of the visual fidelity for the frame rate. And the frame rate and the screen tearing on 360 is not perfect, but for the most, it does really, really well. There are a lot of instances where it chugs a little bit. Every so often, if you're unlucky, you might get some serious slowdown. But those instances aside, it runs really well at the times you need it to. And I really can't complain about those areas. But I have to mention it because there's no doubt going to be a bunch of people saying, oh, this looks ugly, this looks bad, and please don't let that mire your judgment of this game, because it's such a good and awesome title by a company whom this is their first title that they've released, and I really want it to sell well. I really want them to do well, because they've proven that first-person shooters don't have to be about this constant linear Michael Bay bombastic bullshit. They can actually have something in them that's a little bit different, a little bit more creative, and even though there's nothing here that's truly groundbreaking or revolutionary, it's all done with such charm and quality that it's a great game. But this is the first instance, anyhow, of being introduced to the mechanics of Wolfenstein. One of the first things you're going to notice is there's a lean feature, which I'm going to utilise here on this doorway. The lean is an interesting animal. Sometimes it's really useful, sometimes it's really useless. I haven't really found a happy medium with it. It's just one of those features that can be really empowering at times, and at other times it just doesn't seem to make a difference. And what I mean by this is the enemy AI. This is on Uber difficulty, which is apparently the hardest one, and the press before the game basically said this difficulty was going to make you scream and hate the developers, but they must not really have played a challenging game in the last 10 years, because this is very, very simple, folks, if you play it correctly. If you rush in, if you play like a headless chicken, you will die. You will die assertedly. But if you play it intelligently, if you use cover, if you assess your situation, know what you're doing, and pick your shots, you will do just fine. But the enemy's AI is very accurate, which is you're going to see throughout the course of this game, and you'll no doubt experience if you're playing it. And sometimes when you peek out of cover, and you're ever so slightly peeking out of cover where you can see them and you're shooting at them, they can't hit you. Other times, they hit you just as fine. There's also instances in the game where, for whatever reason, I don't know why, it's quite rare that the AI can shoot through walls, and kind of unfair, but it does happen. There are enemies who have shotguns later on that can actually bounce projectiles off of walls and hit you in cover, which is not as bad as it sounds, but it's a definite threat. But there are parts of the geometry which cannot be trusted, and that is pretty much all I'll say on that until we come to the biggest offender in the game. But something else worth noticing too. Throughout this walkthrough, you're going to see my character do some strange things. Most notably, when I try to run, or when I try to run away from things or evade, you might see me aiming down sights sporadically, and sometimes rapidly. If you see me aiming randomly for no reason, or aiming for too long, or anything along those lines, it's my controller, unfortunately. I don't know why this happens, but it happens to me, and I hope it doesn't happen to you. But with the way that Wolfenstein is programmed, it's very sensitive on the left trigger, apparently. The right trigger seems to be fine, and I'm using a custom pad that was designed for Battlefield 4. And I've had no issues with this pad in all of Dark Souls 2. I never randomly parried for no reason. I've had no issues when I played Ghosts a couple of weeks back. It was all spot on. But for some reason in Wolfenstein, it makes me aim when I'm not touching the button. And sometimes when I'm just lightly resting my fingers on the triggers, which is how you hold a pad, it'll aim as well. And there are times when the game just aims all the time, and it's really frustrating on the player, but I just kind of grit my teeth and bear with it. And you shouldn't see too much of it early on. It seems to be very random and capricious in its just evil intent, but there are a couple of instances where it really screwed me over. And those instances were always running, because when you aim when you're running, it cancels the run animation and stops you. So there's a couple of sequences in this game where you have to run and jump, and the amount of times where I ran, stopped because I aimed, jumped and got no distance and fell and died, I actually died more times like that than I did dying to bullets, which should encourage people that this difficulty really is not as hard as they were making it out to be. But another mechanic is this breaking boxes to find ammo. This is a game where if you don't have ammo, it can be very challenging, but it's also a game where there's, aside from a few select circumstances, there is no reason to not have ammo. The game throws it at you, it wants you to use it, it wants you to do what you can. And you might have also noticed that I'm picking items up. The game does not have an auto-collect feature. This is going to frustrate a lot of people because they'll not understand it, but it's harking back to a generation of games that every game played that way. And it can be annoying at times and a little bit finicky when you don't have a mouse to do it, but the thing you need to bear in mind if you are struggling is you don't have to face a thing to pick it up. Just stand near it when you see the icon on the screen, just bash X. Excuse me. And what this does is, you essentially will be mashing X a lot to pick stuff up. And for the people not quite as quick, that is not mashing X on PlayStation. If you're playing that and playing on a 360, you'll possibly be mashing square. But this is another mechanic unique to Wolfenstein. I don't think I've seen anything like this too often. Most notably, there will be something, but I can't really think of it at this moment. And it's this commander mechanic, where you're going to go into these little instances where you have to kill a bunch of dudes. And if you do not kill the commander first and you make your presence known, he'll set off an alarm which allows more troops to spawn in. But if you take out all the commandos, you will not have to face the reinforcements. It's a little bit like on Metal Gear Solid, where they had radios and they could radio for the attack teams. A little bit along those lines, but on this it's more of a gimmick, because the game tells you here is a room where there are 2 targets you need to get rid of before you do anything else. Go about doing it however you will. And as you might have noticed, this is a first-person shooter with a slightly less linear tint to it, where the areas can be approached in a handful of ways. It's not sandboxy, but it's not strictly rollercoastery either. It's just that right amount of choice to make you feel like you could have done something differently. And there goes the signal detected again, which is telling us there's another commander here. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the stealth mechanic, which I really like the stealth mechanic in this game. It's not the best, and unfortunately there are some instances where you can't stealth it. It seems everybody just seems to know where you are. They know you're there and they start shooting you, so the stealth kind of goes out the window. But for every instance where it's not, it can be really fun, and you can have a lot of success just by taking your time, being methodical, and making sure nobody sees you. But a moment ago there, I threw a knife at that commando and I picked it back up. 2 of my favourite weapons on this game are the throwing knives and the silenced pistol, because they enable you to be quiet and they enable you to stealth, and I really enjoy getting through this game with the least amount of worry when it comes to certain instances. Obviously I'm not perfect, and this is not a mastery video walkthrough. This is just, a guide for anybody to get through the hardest difficulty and get the achievements and the trophies that await you at the end. So this is your first option. You can either use the bomb in the other room on the gate, or you can use the bomb here to get into the sewers. And because I'm a product of repetition, I'm going to use the method that I did my first time through. I am playing on an alternative account so that I can get the achievements at the end. And you'll see a crossfade there, guys, because I ran ahead and I didn't pick up the silenced pistol, or the silencer for the pistol, and thus I had to backtrack a little and I didn't want you to see it. But how this game works, it's kind of interesting in this regard. There is a perk system that can sometimes supersede you picking things up as far as equipment and weapons to add to your arsenal. And that's a confusing way, knife fail, of saying you can get the suppressor for your gun by doing a certain requirement that the perk asks of you instead of picking it up. And similarly, I got a throwing knife because I did a certain amount of stealth takedowns that gave me the ability to have throwing knives, whereas if I'd have not done that, I might have later on picked one up and it would have given me the same functionality. But at any point, if you press back, or select if you're playing on PlayStation, you can look at your perk list, and it's essentially a list of things the game is asking of you, and if you meet their requirements, your character will benefit in some ways. Some of them are small and negligible, other ones are much more powerful, and I have no real strategy on how I'm going to approach them, guys. I'm just going to get them if they happen. I'm not going to go out of my way to do them, because in all honesty, they don't have that much of an effect, even though some of them are actually kind of cool. So don't worry, if I have perks you don't have, or if you have perks I don't have, they are trivial for the most. But this sequence here, for some reason, even after you kill the commander, completely stealth-like, when you climb up all the stairways to get to the top, you trip an invisible alarm. And this is my pad. Did you see it just then, kind of going all schizophrenic on me? And I'm not too sure if you can do this without skipping an alert, but for some reason, every single time I've played through, which is only 2 times at this point, it has put me into a hostile situation. And it's not a problem, because the next area is actually quite simple when the alarm goes off, because you can kind of queue them up on the stairs and shoot them. And do not sleep on the weapons here, folks. Just because it's a pistol does not mean it's any less effective. At this point in the game, it's a 1-bullet headshot on most things because they aren't too armoured, and it's a really, really fun gun. And the one I'm using now is the traditional Luger, and it's kind of shitty because the suppressor actually covers the iron sights, which I think is the dumbest design choice they could have used. But when we get into the future a little bit later, it's actually going to be much better, because you're going to be able to see the front post and actually use it as the weapon is intended. And I'm not going to say it actually anymore, because I seem to be on this chorus of that fucking word. But this is the kind of future tech, kind of crazy, is it Sturmgewehr? And you'll notice that I kind of did some weird cover stuff just then. That was the pad, just bear with it. The cool thing I like about this game when it comes to the shooting, aside from how satisfying and well designed it is that you don't get view kicked when you're shot, but the enemies kinda do. And it evens out the game, and that's one of the things that I don't think Call of Duty's ever done right. When you get view kicked, you're at a massive disadvantage. And the computer doesn't need any more advantage than it already has, for Christ's sake. It's a perfectly aiming robot that is essentially a string of binary that if it wants to hit you, it puts a 1 instead of a 0. So you do not need to empower the AI any more than they already are. And this is a game that understands that. So when you get the first shot off, more than likely, even if you didn't hit them in the face or anywhere important, you can stun them long enough to finish them off. And it gives you a much more fair first-person shooter environment. You might have just noticed as well just then there was a crossfade from me going to pick that item up to being where I am now. To my right is the lane that leads to that item, and for some reason, I don't know why, but as I ran towards it to pick it up, my character went straight through the box and fell all the way down to the bottom, all those staircases, and bizarrely, I took no damage, which I thought it would have killed me, but it didn't, thank goodness. And the crossfade was just alleviating the need for you to watch me go all the way back up. Oh, bit of jump shotting. But as I was saying, the flinch is incredibly powerful. However, some enemies don't really flinch, so you need to be aware of this. And the enemies that don't are pretty much the heavies. And there's about 3 different kinds of heavies, 4 if you want to class one who's technically a boss, I think. And each of those, you know, they will sponge damage and they'll be firing back eagerly at you. Every so often they might have a stun animation, but it generally involves hurting them a lot before you can really do it. And sometimes, a good example of this is the final boss, you can actually hurt an enemy past a certain threshold where they no longer get stunned by things that would stun them. A good example would be the Tesla grenades, which is an electrical grenade that stuns robots, and the final boss, when you throw them at him, it stuns him for a little while. If you do a certain amount of damage in his final phase and you throw one at him, it will not stun him. He will continue to shoot you with double machine guns which rip you to bits on Uber, so be very careful. Throughout this walkthrough, I will be picking up the Enigma codes, I will be picking up, you know, various of the collectibles, the gold pieces, but I will not be finding them all. I do not do walkthroughs with collectibles or anything along those lines, guys. Mainly because I don't really enjoy them. To make them, that is. Collectibles to me are very hit and miss. I like them when they're not completely anal stupid and take a ridiculous amount of effort to find. I like games even better that give you some way of knowing where they are. And games at this moment in time are getting to the point where collectibles are generally tracked well, and some of them even have an ability to find them via clues and via, you know, UI interface stuff, which is all the better as well. But not all games have this, so they can be a giant pain in the ass. So for me, never really been the type of dude to make those kind of videos, although I do understand their popularity, and the people who make them have a lot of success because there's a lot of people like me who just couldn't give 2 shits about finding them, so they'll just put up a video and they'll follow that and it alleviates that struggle. But this is just going to get you through the game, folks. It's not going to get you any of all the perks or all the shit, but I do pick stuff up because I'm mashing square or X all the time. And sometimes I pick up stuff I don't mean to, which is kind of annoying. But here is me showing you the effectiveness of the lean. It can be incredibly useful sometimes. You'll notice I'm not taking any bullets at this point. People are just missing me. Other times they'll hit you with every single shot. I'm not too sure if this is anything to do with which cover is destructible and which cover isn't, because maybe getting hit sometimes can be as the cover depreciates, but later on in the game there is an instance where it is literally a wall that has no destructible, properties, and you will just get shot. Also, at the second part of this particular prequel mission here, there's an instance where you have to get on a turret, and if you go to the right instead of using the turret and climb into a plane, you will freely get shot through geometry for no other reason than your dog, you should not have been there. So be very, very careful of that. But after you've shivved the Nazi and you've got on the cannon, you want to blow the plane up, then put a second shell on the ridge to take out the remaining bad guys. And it's pretty much clean sailing here until you run all the way around the corner and get attacked by one of the mechanical dogs. And the mechanical dogs themselves are pretty... I don't know, like, maybe they were an interesting idea once, but they show up quite a lot, and they're kind of just quick time events, which are not the most fun. So you do have to fight them occasionally, but for the most, it's instances like this where when we touch this door, it's going to attack us, and do not waste your ammo here. There's just no need, because there's nothing you can do. I think if you shoot it, it might let go of you quicker than it normally would. I'm not too sure. But on my first playthrough, I actually threw grenades at it to try and stop it. And I find it funny that he throws one grenade at that one and its head comes off, and later on in the game I have to fire like 10 rockets at one of them to kill it. A little bit of inconsistencies there on the whole game design front, but we understand why. It's game balance and it does make sense. But I'm coming in here to make sure that I don't miss anything and stack up on life and armor, because the next sequence is a little bit tricky. So thank you for watching, and you take care now.